I'm recording this on a phone. Let's think about the etymology of phone. I'm recording this on a sound. I'm recording this on a telephone. I'm recording this on a far sound. I don't think of this thing in my hand that I hold as a sound. I think of it as a little dingus. In fact, sometimes I just call it a dingus. I'm whatchamacallit, a doohickey, thingamabob. It's a little black rectangle thing that does a lot of stuff. It's a miniature computer. Oh, and incidentally, you can also make telephone calls with it. You can make far sound calls with it. Language. Language is volatile. Words for things are volatile. Language is arbitrary, almost universally at the root. I remember actually when I was studying linguistics 20-something years ago, that was the subject of one of my research projects, is arbitrariness and iconicity. I was very taken with this idea of like, well, what if there are some features of language that are just that are iconic, that are of necessity how they are because they reflect in a self-evident way what they're referring to, and there's precious little of that operating in language. Let me tell you, for the most part, it's arbitrary, and people have known that for thousands and thousands of years. People have argued and reflected on that. And you can reflect on the way that the words get kind of dragged along and start to be used to refer to something that's kind of adjacent to what they originally were. I mean, what else are we supposed to do? All language is kind of an extension of a concept by metaphor to something else. So, that's cool. Why do we use cool for so many things? I guess, was it before air conditioning? Was that why, being cool in a place where there were hot summers was kind of like a mark of approval? But that's one example. You don't really have to look very far to start finding examples. One of my favorite examples is, maybe this is getting a little bit snarky, but when people talk about mental health, and I might have talked about this before, and maybe this is a bit of a departure from exactly what I was saying before, but when people talk about mental health, for the most part, they're not talking really about mental health. They've got this concept in their mind about, well, if you're mentally healthy, I think that should mean that you should feel okay, right? So I'm going to talk about mental health, but really what I mean is emotional ease. But I'm not thinking clearly about the underlying reality or concepts behind the words I'm using, which is why I think that ChatGPT is really cool, because my whole concept of reality is just this unreflective, kind of herd mentality, bedazzlement and enthrallment to the spells of language. And so I think instead of trying to really instead of following old Jack Kerouac's advice, which he probably got from somewhere else, to not try to come up with better, instead of fussing over the words you use, try to see the picture clearer, or try to grasp what you're trying to talk about or write about more clearly, and then the words will come naturally. But instead of doing that, people will just kind of grasp at a word that just sort of seems to fit, and they'll just shove it in. And this is just kind of a human tendency. It doesn't make it useful. It doesn't help with the noise created by people talking about mental health when they really should be talking about emotional ease and making a clear distinction between the two, because you can have a perfectly soundly functioning, cognitive system and understanding and sound mental map of the world and everything, and still feel really wretchedly sorrowful. But that's that is part of our human heritage as a bunch of idiots down here. So, musical instrument terms are spectacularly volatile. A tar is a frame drum, or maybe it's a stringed instrument. A tambor is a drum, or maybe a tambura is a stringed instrument. A gaita in Spain is a bagpipe, but in, Colombia, it's a flute. What is it? Zampoña. I think zampoña in Spain is a hurdy-gurdy, or bagpipe, but in the Andes, I think it's a pan flute. Now, if I'm wrong, please correct me on this. But words get pressed into service and thrown around. I'm actually going to be talking in November. Big announcement. I'm going to be at the Book of Mormon Culture Conference in Provo in November, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about archives and the concept of archives and what people mean when they say archives, and how we could hold ourselves very strictly to a rigorous, meticulous definition of archives, which would basically exclude most of what people think of when they say or talk about archives, and most of what I, as a professional archivist for the past 20 years, have actually worked with, because I haven't been a civil servant in the employ of like a government office overseeing the permanent storage of, say, the institutional memory of a government office. I haven't been in the National Archives taking care of the legislative record or whatever, things like that. I've been in manuscript repositories looking after old manuscripts and things like that were kept because people thought there was a good reason to keep them for their research value. But archives, in popular parlance, yes, those are archives. In a really strict, rigorous definition, I don't think so. But what does it matter? What does it matter to most people? You choose the word that'll work well enough in the situation, you throw it out there, it gets the point across, you move on. Most people aren't neurotic like me and don't obsess over details like this. Most people are just trying to get on with other things in their lives. This has to do, of course, with the way that the authors of the Book of Mormon wrote and whatever words they chose to use in Egyptian, and however those words got translated into English. People really get obsessive or get upset over words like horse or any other sort of animal words, or steel or chariot, or actually one of my favorites is cement. It's something I've been thinking about recently, and I was in a Instagram comment section argument with a real idiot who couldn't see his own stupidity and tried to throw AI slop at me to shut me up and make me think he was so smart, and couldn't understand this concept I was trying to explore was that, and it actually goes along with why I'm not in step with the popular sort of apologetic thinking about cement relative to Mesoamerica. A popular way of dealing with this, or of treating this, is to point at Helaman 3 and say, look, there are these buildings in Mesoamerica that are built with this limestone concoction of some sort. And I don't know, there's these variations, and people, it's funny, people will say, well, that's not the same kind of cement that we're talking about here as there. Like, look, you take limestone, you do something to limestone, and it makes it somehow like that you can build stuff with it, with a limestone concoction and rocks, whether that's Portland cement or the old-fashioned limestone cement. The fact is, you're doing some kind of preparation with burnt limestone. So whatever you want to call it, people treat the word cement as it appears on the pages of the Book of Mormon, that absolutely necessitates some kind of preparation of burnt limestone. Why should it? That's where I depart from the sort of popular consensus or majority opinion of apologists, is I don't think that the word cement given to Joseph Smith to dictate has to equate to any kind of burnt limestone preparation of any kind that you want to think of. It denotes some kind of sticky building material that's not wood, that you can use in some kind of technique when building timber is scarce. And that word, it reflects some kind of concept and glyph that Mormon put on the plates, and cement was the most handy, useful translation, because the Book of Mormon doesn't really get into the kind of vocabulary that a current novelist or a current scientific textbook would. It has this sort of limited, hieratic vocabulary to it, consistent with it being originally written with an arcane language, arcane script for a dead language, as a dead liturgical language. So there was something going on, that there was something sticky that people decided to build with instead of the usual timber construction, hard plant matter, whatever it was that they were used to. Instead of doing that, they were doing something alternative, something with the sticky stuff that you get from nature somehow. And Mormon, reading the reports that Helaman would have written down about this, Mormon was not going through old archives. This is something that I've recently understood better and will have bearing on what I present about in November. There was a hypothesis that I thought was convincing at one point, to somebody saying, well, Mormon is looking at the historical record. These are things that happened hundreds of years before he was born, after all. And so, to cook limestone, you have to burn a lot of wood, right? It makes no sense that people living in a place that's deforested are suddenly going to start burning a whole bunch of wood to cook limestone, to make whatever the heck it is they're making out of all that cooked limestone. Whatever you want to call it, whatever variation or permutation, I don't care. The point is, it makes no sense for a deforested area to be where they're going to start doing this. And somebody said, well, what happened was probably they went into an area, they started cutting down all the trees to cook the limestone to build with this new material. Mormon, looking backward, didn't see the cause and effect and switched them around and saying, oh yeah, the land was deforested and that's why they were building with cement. That might work for like an academic research pouring through an archives that we know about and misunderstanding or taking from sources that the sources themselves were going through. There are certain ways that I can see the sequence of events getting garbled in that way, but I don't see that making sense in the production environment of either the large plates, Helaman's portion of the large plates, which was Mormon's source for this passage, or Mormon's treatment of Helaman's writing in the large plates. Helaman was keeping the large plates as the chief judge, and he would have had people bringing him reports from colonizers, going north and finding, oh, this land is deforested. You think that Helaman is going to write down, you think that the people are going to go into the land northward, start cutting down all the trees to cook limestone, and people are going to come back to Helaman and Zarahemla in the judgment seat and say, yeah, all the people that lived here before left it without timber, so we're going to have to find something else to build with. So, you know what we've been doing? We've been cutting down all the trees and cooking limestone to build with this nifty new stuff. And Helaman writes it down, or Helaman mishears, and they say, yeah, we've been cutting down all the trees and cooking limestone to build with this stuff. And Helaman writes down, oh yeah, there were no trees left. That's a stretch, even for me. Even with all I've said about the way that humans distort things with memory and perception, I don't see that's going too far to think that Helaman is going to misunderstand the reports of travelers and write that cause and effect down the wrong way. So I take this as what it says, that people come from the north, messages come back to Helaman. At the time, correct me if I'm wrong, at the time, Helaman is sitting on the judgment seat, and people are reporting that there's this deforested land. And so literally because it's deforested, people are choosing some other building material and technique besides timber. And it's something sticky. And he writes a glyph for a word that the best translation for it in 1829 in English is cement. Could it have been translated mortar? What if it wasn't exactly mortar and stones? What if it was something more like wattle and daub? Should the translator have said wattle and daub? What if Mormon didn't write a glyph for something corresponding to wattle and a glyph corresponding somehow to daub? What if Mormon just had like a cultural context and he just wrote a glyph that denoted sticky gunk plaster? Okay, should the translating agent, you want to take that up with God at Judgment Day, God or whoever did the translation, why didn't you say plaster or adobe or mud or cob or whatever instead of cement? All right. I guess if you want to quibble, but maybe you can hold back and say, and again, see that this is an example of how language works, and it was a word that worked at the time. But I'm gonna put a flag on this hill. If I'm not gonna die on this hill, I'm at least gonna prepare to defend it for a long time. Cement doesn't necessitate or require any kind of limestone preparation at all. Maybe it was, but it doesn't have to be. All right, I'm almost at 17 minutes. I'm going to stop. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you later.